was a rainy Tuesday night, the kind of rain that comes down sideways and makes the whole world feel like it's closing in. I was sitting in my old armchair with a half-empty bottle of wine, just listening to the wind slam against the pine trees out back. The house was quiet, too quiet, the way it always gets when you live alone for long enough that silence starts to feel like a second person in the room. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. My spam app flagged it immediately, and I almost let it go. Almost. But something made me pick up. "Hello, is this Mr. Carter?" The voice on the other end was soft, calm, professional. She said her name was Emily, and she worked for a credit card company, calling about my father's account. I told her he'd been gone for 6 years, and something about the way she paused, the little sound she made, it didn't feel like a customer service pause. It felt like someone who actually cared, which was strange, which was the first thing that felt wrong. I stayed on the line. There was nothing else to do that night, honestly, no one else to call, so I stayed. She had this laugh, a light, easy laugh, and it hit me somewhere I wasn't expecting, because I'd heard that laugh before, not from a stranger, from someone I used to know. My wife's name was also Emily. I know how that sounds, I do, but hear me out, because what happened next is the part I still can't explain. She mentioned she'd gone to Jefferson Memorial High School. I asked without thinking, because something in my gut had already put the pieces together before my brain caught up. And when she confirmed it, I felt the ground shift under me. "What is today's date?" I asked her. She paused again. Papers shuffled, the sound of a filing cabinet, the faint crackle of a phone line that sounded older, like something you'd hear on a recording from decades past. July 9th, 1999. My hands went cold because I knew that date. I knew it the way you know the exact moment your life split in two. July 9th, 2015 was the night my wife was killed. I sat there in the dark, rain hammering the windows, wine glass forgotten in my hand, and I made a choice. I told her everything. I told her that she was going to meet a man she would love completely, that he would be devoted to her in ways she couldn't yet imagine, that on their first Christmas together, he would give her 12 gifts for 12 days, one for each day of the holiday, that they would get married in her hometown, surrounded by everyone she loved, including her Aunt Rosa and her grandmother from Tennessee. She laughed at that, called me a fortune cookie, and then I told her the rest. I told her that on July 9th, 2015, she needed to be somewhere else, anywhere else. I told her that danger would find her at home that night, and that she needed to leave. I told her to trust me, even though I was a stranger, even though none of it made any sense. The line went quiet. Then she asked me, "So what do I do?" I started talking faster, tried to give her specifics, tried to give her enough that she would remember, enough that maybe, just maybe. And then the line went dead. Not a hang up, not a disconnect. It just stopped, like someone had reached in and pulled the wire straight out of the wall. I called back, non-working number. I sat there in the dark for a long time after that, long enough for the storm to pass, long enough for the wine to go warm. I didn't sleep much. The memory of her voice, that younger, lighter version of her voice, kept playing on a loop somewhere behind my eyes. I told myself it was grief. The wine, the storm, something in the wiring of a lonely man's brain that makes him hear what he needs to hear. And then the morning came, and when I opened my eyes, she was lying beside me, not a ghost, not a dream. Emily, my Emily, breathing slowly in the gray morning light, her hand resting on the pillow between us, the way it always used to. I didn't move for a long time. I was afraid that if I moved, she would disappear. She didn't. I still don't understand what happened that night. I've turned it over in my mind 1,000 times since, whether it was the storm, whether there's something about certain dates and certain frequencies and certain kinds of grief that can reach backward through time, or whether someone, somewhere, decided that one phone call was worth making. I don't know. What I do know is that I'm not going to question it. Not tonight. Not with the rain falling again outside and her breathing quiet and steady beside me. Some things don't need an explanation. Some things you just hold on to and you don't let go. I want to see how far this video has reached. Drop your city and time in the comments. Something strange happened to me when I was house sitting for my parents, and I still can't fully explain it. Not in a way that would make sense to most people, but I need to get it out because what happened that night changed how I think about a lot of things. Let me take you back to the beginning. I was what you'd call an oops baby, last in a long line of grandkids on both sides of the family. By the time I came around, both my grandmothers were already gone, and my two grandfathers were getting up there in age, living in different states. Visits were rare. Coordinating travel with an infant on a tight budget, yeah, that just wasn't happening very often. But my parents, they really wanted me to know these men, so we made do with what we had. Phone calls, letters they'd read to me while I babbled along, crayon drawings I'd mail back, the kind only a 3-year-old thinks is art. When I was around 3, both grandfathers started to slip, their health declining one after the other. And my mum, she did something that I think was really beautiful, even if I didn't appreciate it for years. She bought 2 teddy bears, the kind with little recorders sewn inside, and she made sure to capture a voice message from each of them before it was too late. My mum's father passed when I was 4. A few days after his funeral, she handed me a white teddy bear with bright blue eyes and a little plaid flat cap and a green sweater. I squeezed it around the middle the way kids do, and I heard his voice, slightly muffled, coming from somewhere in its stomach. I love you, Sadie. 2 years later, Dad's father was gone too. That one was a slate gray bear with a stern little stitched face and red suspenders holding up tan trousers. My dad told me later, with tears in his eyes, that throughout the first night I had that bear, he kept hearing Grandpop's voice drifting out from my room in the dark. I love you, Sadie. I named them Fran and Jock, put them on a shelf above my bed, and honestly, they just kind of became part of the furniture. I didn't think much about them growing up. Every so often, I'd come home from school and find one of my parents standing at my bedside, giving one of the bears a gentle squeeze. But for me, they were just dust collectors with faded memories I barely had. When I went off to college, Fran and Jock didn't make the cut. My mom asked, gently, whether I'd want them when I got my first apartment. I told her no. She said okay, and added, quietly, that they'd be there if I ever changed my mind. I was pretty sure I wouldn't. Fast forward a few years, my parents finally booked the trip out west my dad had been promising my mom for over 30 years. They were buzzing with excitement. I drove them to the airport and spent the entire car ride reassuring my mum that yes, I knew where the financial documents were. Yes, I remembered the lockbox in the closet. And yes, I would be absolutely fine. A lot can happen in a week, she said from the back seat. I grinned at her in the rearview mirror. She made a face at me. Classic. I drove back to their place, tossed my bag on my childhood bed, made some dinner, and started a show. Lazy lump mode officially activated. Somewhere around the 3rd episode, I started nodding off and figured I'd just turn in early. I shut off the TV, plunged the house into dark, and made my way to my old room. When I hit the light switch, my eyes went straight to that shelf above the bed. Fran and Jock, right where I'd left them years ago. I don't know why, but something made me smile. I reached up and plucked Fran down first, tweaked his little flat cap, squeezed his stomach. I love you, Sadie. Grandpa's voice, warm, steady, still working after all these years. I put him back, then Jock. Snapped one of his red suspenders and squeezed. I love you, Sadie. Grandpop, deep and gravelly, still there. I changed into my PJs and fell asleep fast. I don't know what woke me. No nightmare I could remember. Just my heart beating way too fast. The room dark and still. I rolled over and came face to face with something on the pillow beside me. I yelped, grabbed my phone, turned on the screen. It was Fran, just lying there on his side, inches from my face. I let out a breath and laughed at myself. He must have fallen off the shelf while I was sleeping. I picked him up. "Did you fall off?" I whispered, and then I squeezed him. "Get out." I froze. That was Grandpa's voice, but not the soft, warm version I knew. This was cold, hard, almost threatening. I squeezed him again. "Get out." I threw Fran across the room. He hit the wall and landed on the floor. And that's when I heard it from above my head. "Get out." I spun around. Jock was still on the shelf, but he was turned, not facing forward like he always had been. He was facing the door. "Get out." Grandpa's voice from across the room, louder now. "Get out." Grandpa's voice from over my head, echoing it, back and forth, louder and louder. Both of them, my two dead grandfathers, howling through two stuffed animals in the middle of the night. I slapped my hands over my ears and lurched out of bed, nearly tripping in the dark. My voice was completely gone. No scream came out, just silence from me and chaos from them. And then Jock said something that stopped me cold. "I know you're down there, not at me." He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the door, at something below, something downstairs. I had 1 second to process that before Fran screamed from the floor. "I see you." I yanked my door open and stumbled into the hallway. "You take one more step," Jock bellowed. "I'll make sure it's your last. Get out," Fran roared. And somewhere downstairs, a step creaked. Someone was in the house. It hit me all at once, this strange collision of relief and absolute terror. They weren't yelling at me. They never were. They were warning whoever was down there, protecting me. "Get out," both voices, together, one final time. Then I heard it, footsteps scrambling. Something knocked over in the living room. Then in the kitchen, the back door slammed open so hard it hit the counter. A car engine fired up outside. I ran to my parents' bedroom window and looked down at the driveway. An SUV was peeling backwards into the street, fishtailing hard enough to clip the neighbor's mailbox before straightening out and screeching away into the dark. Silence. I stood there for a long moment, shaking. Then I crept back to my doorway and peered into my room. Fran was still on the floor. Jock was still on the shelf. Both of them completely silent. I waited. Nothing. I walked slowly to where Fran lay on his side, cap knocked off beside him. I put the cap back on his head, and with trembling fingers, I squeezed his stomach. "I love you, Sadie." Grandpa, warm again, soft again, just like always. I put him back on the shelf next to Jock, backed out of the room, kept my eyes on them the whole way. And as I turned the corner toward the stairs to find the phone, "I love you, Sadie," Grandpop's voice, trailing after me down the hall. The police came. I filed a report. I left out the part about the bears. They found the guy a few days later. Turned out he was a co-worker of my dad's, who'd overheard about the trip and figured the house would be empty. When he tried to tell the officers about the two terrifying men upstairs screaming threats at him, they laughed. He was genuinely shocked to learn that the only person home that night was a 22-year-old woman. When I called my parents, they wanted to fly straight back. I told them not to, told them I was fine, told them I was pretty sure whoever it was wouldn't be coming back. When I finally drove home at the end of the week, Fran and Jock were in the back seat with me. They live on my TV stand now, facing the front door, full view of whoever comes in. And when I start to feel anxious at night, alone in my apartment, I walk over and give each of them a little squeeze. "I love you, Sadie." And now, I say it back. Something came back to my house 6 months after my husband disappeared. It looked like him. It smiled like him. It knew my name, knew where we kept the spare key, knew how I liked my coffee. But I knew, from the very first morning, that whatever walked through my front door was not the man I married. Let me tell you why I'm certain. and I mean absolutely, bone-deep certain. My husband Ryan vanished on a Tuesday in March, just gone. Drove to work and never showed up. No accident, no witnesses, no note. The police investigated for months. Our families fell apart. I went through every stage of grief there is. And then, slowly, painfully, I started to accept that Ryan wasn't coming home until he was standing in my backyard. I was watering my flowers when the gate creaked open, and there he was. Same sandy blonde hair, same blue eyes, same crooked little smile. I nearly dropped the hose. He looked completely fine, completely normal, like he'd just stepped out for a walk and lost track of time for 6 months. He said he didn't remember where he'd been, not a single day of it. Everyone else was overjoyed. His mother cried for an hour, our friends threw a party, and I stood there in the middle of it all, smiling and feeling something cold and quiet crawling up my spine. Because the first morning he was home, I made him tea. I handed him the cup, and without even thinking, he dropped a sugar cube in. Ryan never took sugar in his tea. Never. He used to get genuinely annoyed if I accidentally added any, said it ruined everything about the taste. But this man just dropped the sugar in and took a sip and smiled at me like nothing was wrong. I told myself I was imagining things. Then there was the golf. Ryan had this one golfer he followed religiously. He once skipped our anniversary dinner to watch a championship match. So when a tournament aired while this man was out visiting his mother, I recorded it. I told him when he got home, and he just shrugged, said thanks, never watched it, asked if I wanted to go get dinner instead. The real Ryan would have been glued to that screen for 3 hours. But this man didn't even glance at the TV. I started paying closer attention. One night I woke up at 2 in the morning, and he was right there. His face was inches from mine in the dark, just watching me. Those eyes were completely blank. I laughed nervously and asked what he was doing. And for 30 full seconds, he said nothing, just stared. Then he smiled and said, "Sorry, honey. Sometimes I just can't believe this is real." Then he rolled over and went right back to sleep. I did not sleep at all after that. Then came the block party. The whole neighborhood turned out to welcome him home. He worked the crowd perfectly, laughed at all the right moments, hugged all the right people. And then our neighbor's little boy, Jackson, wanted to play peekaboo with him, and he just got down and played along, laughing and clapping. Now, Ryan hated kids. He always said so. He especially avoided Jackson. I had my own reasons for noticing that, which I'll get to in a moment. And then there was Sally. She showed up the next morning with a tray of brownies. Typical Sally, always finding a reason to push her way into my life. When she left, I muttered something unkind under my breath, and this man laughed. He kissed my forehead and agreed with me. The real Ryan would never have done that, because Ryan and Sally had been sleeping together for years. He always defended her, always made me feel like I was the unreasonable one for being upset. But this man, this stranger, didn't even flinch. That was the moment I knew for certain. But the thing that sealed it, the thing that made everything else irrelevant, was the scar. Ryan had a scar on the side of his forehead, a distinct one. I know exactly how he got it, and I know exactly what it looks like. This man had nothing there, not a mark, not a trace, clean skin where that scar should have been. I ordered 2 DNA tests online, waited until he was asleep, pulled a few strands of hair and sent them off, heart pounding the whole time. Told myself I just needed an answer, one way or another. The first test came back inconclusive. The company said the sample wasn't viable. I didn't understand that. I had pulled the hair myself. The second test came back with something that I've been staring at ever since, where his ancestry should have been, the word unknown, where his relatives should have been listed, nothing, no family, no ancestors, no biological connections anywhere on Earth. According to 2 separate DNA companies, this man does not exist. I was sitting at the computer in the study, browser tabs open everywhere, trying to make sense of it, when I heard his voice from the doorway. "Rebecca." I hadn't heard the front door open, and our door always creaks. Always. I turned around with a smile I didn't feel. He wasn't smiling back. His face was completely calm, but there was something hard in the line of his mouth that I had never seen before, something underneath his voice that made the hairs on my neck stand straight up. He held something up, slowly, one eyebrow raised. The DNA test results. Some letters change your life the moment you read them. This one changed everything. It was left in the mailbox of a quiet house, on a quiet street, in a neighborhood where nothing strange ever seemed to happen. But something strange had been happening for a very long time. And the girl who left that letter had been watching, waiting, surviving. This is her story. My name doesn't matter anymore, but yours does, and that's why I'm writing this. The first time I saw you, I was genuinely surprised that I could see you at all. You were standing in the front yard, holding a small turtle in both hands, naming him Michelangelo, like the Ninja Turtle. You tossed your long brown hair behind your shoulder and set him down gently in the grass. You laughed when he wobbled, a real laugh, the kind I hadn't heard in a long time, maybe ever, from where I was sitting. I watched you from a crack in the wall, a small crack, high up near the ceiling of the basement I had come to call home. That crack was everything. I watched your entire childhood through that little opening, your first bicycle ride, when you fell twice before finally pedaling down the sidewalk on your own. Your first day of school, in that little blue backpack that was almost bigger than you were. Your first real friend, a girl named Madison, who used to come over and sit with you in the grass, catching fireflies. You two would laugh so loud, I could hear you even down here. I watched you grow. I watched the world move forward without me, while I stayed exactly where I was. You probably want to know how I got here, how a 15-year-old girl ends up in a basement, watching someone else grow up through a crack in a wall. It wasn't anything dramatic at first. It never is. He was charming. He knew exactly what to say, exactly how to smile. And in one single moment, one ordinary afternoon, everything changed. My arms were twisted behind my back before I even understood what was happening, and just like that, it was over. The life I had before, the girl I was before, gone. I remember thinking I would fight. I had always told myself that if something like this ever happened, I would fight like hell. I would scream, I would claw, I would never stop. But you don't. Something inside you breaks. Some quiet, essential part of you just folds, and you become something smaller, something easier to contain. I learned to float. That's what I called it. When things got bad, I would just rise above it, detach. I read once that people who go through near-death experiences sometimes describe hovering above their own bodies, watching from a distance while doctors work on them. The brain does it as a protection. It becomes detached, so the person feels safe. That's what I did. I floated. Every single day, I floated. But there was one thing that kept pulling me back down. You. Watching you was the only thing that made any of this bearable. The way you moved through your life so freely, so easily, so bright. You didn't know someone was watching. You didn't know that your happiness was keeping someone alive. Years passed. I lost count of exactly how many. I know I was 15 when he brought me here. I know I must be in my late 20s now. The math is there, even when the calendar isn't. I watched other girls come through. I won't say too much about that. I don't want you to carry those images. Just know that the walls of that basement hold stories that no one should ever have to know. But the agents found them, all of them, and they will be identified. They will be given back their names. I watched him too, studied him, learned his patterns, the way you learn the layout of a room in the dark. I knew when he was careless. I knew when his guard was down. And I knew, the moment he started talking about you, that I had to act. He mentioned your legs, just casually, like it was nothing. But I knew what it meant. I knew what came next. I had seen it before, and I was not going to let it happen to you. So I made a plan. It wasn't a perfect plan. I was weak. Years of this had left me thin and brittle and slow. But I had one advantage he had never anticipated. He had forgotten that I was still human. He had gotten so used to my silence, my submission, my floating, that he forgot I had a mind. He forgot I had been watching him just as carefully as I had been watching you. I made myself go limp, completely still, eyes open, not breathing, mouth slack. He came over to check. He crouched down beside me, and I could see in his face, just for a moment, that real shock of someone who thinks they've lost something they owned. That's when I bit down into his neck as hard as I could. He never saw it coming. I don't think he even remembered what my smile looked like until he felt it on his skin. He stumbled. He fell. I stood up for the first time in what felt like forever, and I looked down at him the way he had looked down at me 1,000 times before. And then I ran. I found his keys. I ran upstairs, out the door, into the daylight. The sun was so bright, it felt like a physical thing pushing against my face. I stopped on the sidewalk just for a second, just 1 second, and I breathed. Real air. Outside air. The kind that doesn't smell like concrete and old fear. And then I walked to your mailbox and left you a letter. I drove his truck into the desert. I left it there with him in the back seat, barely conscious, bleeding. I thought it was over. I stood in the open desert under a sky full of stars, and I thought I was finally free. And then I heard his footsteps behind me. He was laughing, blood in his mouth, face barely recognizable, and he was laughing. He said he knew I hadn't really been dead. He said he let me think it worked. He had survived worse. I smiled. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out his gun. I shot both of his feet. He went down, and I stood over him the way he had stood over me. And I said something I had been saving up for years. I told him that I wasn't a kid anymore. I wasn't really even the person he thought he had made. I was something else entirely. Something he had created, yes, but something he couldn't control anymore. And that was the end of that chapter. Now, I need to be honest with you about something. I know you're in college now. Criminal justice. I think I had something to do with that, a little. I love what you've done with your dorm room. I love what you've done with your hair. When the light hits it a certain way in the afternoon, you look like something out of a dream. I know you're wondering how I know that. I still watch you. I'm not ready to stop. The nightmares still come. Some nights so bad, I wake up drenched and shaking and convinced I'm still down there. And when that happens, watching you sleep, watching your chest rise and fall in that slow, safe rhythm is the only thing that makes the room feel real again. I know how that sounds. I do. But I want you to know, I am not a threat to you. You are the only reason I survived. You are the reason I escaped. You are the reason I'm still here. And one day, when all of this is truly over, when the last loose end is finally tied up, I'm going to knock on your door, and I'm going to introduce myself, and maybe, if you're willing, we can be real friends. Until then, with everything I have, the girl who watched you grow up. The family released this letter 6 months after the events described. The investigation into Ryan Morehouse led to the discovery of 15 sets of remains at the property. Morehouse himself was never found. The girl who wrote the letters was never identified. Somewhere out there, she is still watching, still waiting, still surviving. The crack in the wall of that basement was the only window she had for over a decade. Through it, she watched an entire childhood unfold, and somehow that was enough to keep a light on in the darkest place imaginable. Her name was Maya, and she was the smartest person I have ever known. I'm a research physicist. I've spent my entire adult life studying the laws that govern how the universe works, and I still cannot explain what my little sister built in her bedroom when she was 13 years old. I'm not sure I want to. We came from a family of exceptionally gifted people. My father was a neurosurgeon. My mother worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. My older sister Claire was a published artist before she was old enough to drive. And me, I was a full-time research associate in high-energy physics at a university I still can't name without risking my career. I tell you all of this not to impress you, but so you understand what I mean when I say Maya made every single one of us look completely average, like she was operating on a frequency the rest of us simply couldn't tune into. In the summer of 2003, I was 16, almost 17, and I was deep in a research rabbit hole, buried in dense academic papers, when I heard her voice behind me. "They're wrong, you know." I groaned. "Maya, what did we say about knocking?" "Oh," she said, sounding genuinely surprised. "I didn't think about the door." I frowned and spun my chair around to look at her. My room was empty. I rubbed my eyes, looked again. Nothing. I was already writing it off as an auditory hallucination, sleep deprivation catching up with me, when I heard her giggle, right in front of me, clear as day. "All right, where are you?" "Right here," she laughed. I stood up, looked behind the desk, checked the closet. She'd pulled a prank like this before at age 10, hidden a custom-built speaker array around my room that could make her voice appear anywhere in the space. It had been genuinely impressive, but this time I couldn't find a single speaker, not one. "How are you doing this?" "That's going to be hard to explain. That was Maya, for you won't understand it." "Try me," I said, "because I'm stubborn." She did, and she was right. I didn't understand it. She talked about atomic frequencies, post-dimensional drift, superliminal desynchronization, and something she called the Planck supratemporal parallel. I had a migraine forming behind my right eye before she was halfway through. Almost none of it mapped onto any physics I had ever studied, and I had studied a lot of physics. But here's the thing that kept nagging at me. She was still invisible. Whatever she'd done, it was working, and that meant the limits of my understanding had absolutely no bearing on the reality of what was happening right in front of me. "Okay," I said slowly, "but how did you get in here?" "The door is closed." "Oh," she said casually. "I just walked where the walls weren't." I stared at the empty space in front of me for a long moment. "You walked where the walls weren't," she sighed. It was a very specific kind of sigh, the kind that meant someone much smarter than you was patiently searching for a simpler way to explain something obvious. I knew that sigh well, and I hated it. The walls aren't everywhere, Divya. In most places, most realities, the walls aren't there at all. So I just walked through the places where they weren't. I wanted to ask for the math. I wanted proofs, equations, something I could hold on to. But I knew she wouldn't have written them down, and even if she had, I already knew I wouldn't fully grasp them. That was the hardest part. Not that she was invisible, but that she was smarter than me, and always had been, and there was nothing I could do about that. Then she said something that stopped me completely. "You haven't noticed, have you?" "Noticed what? What language am I speaking?" I had to actually stop and think about that. "English, isn't it?" She giggled again. Then she started speaking, long, flowing sentences, and if I focused very carefully, I could tell the sounds coming out of her mouth didn't quite match the words landing in my brain, like watching a foreign film where the dubbing is so perfect you almost don't catch it. She quoted Latin. She quoted ancient Hindi scripture from the Ramcharitmanas, and every single word arrived in my head as clean, fluent English. No translation, no delay, just meaning flowing directly into my mind like she was wired straight into my understanding. That was something else entirely. We started meeting regularly after that, late nights, after lights out, after our parents had gone to sleep. Someone had to try and document this language, this universal lexicon she'd stumbled into. We'd lie on the floor, naming objects, testing phonemes, chasing the ghost sounds beneath the words I thought I was hearing. It felt like the most important research either of us would ever do. And then one night, she stopped. Mid-sentence. Just stopped. I couldn't see her, obviously, but something shifted in the room. Like the air pressure changed. Like the temperature dropped 2 degrees in an instant. I felt her go completely still in a way that had nothing to do with quiet and everything to do with fear. "Maya?" I whispered. Shh, barely audible. But the urgency behind it hit me like a hand over the mouth. So I went quiet, and I waited. The silence that followed wasn't ordinary silence. It started at the edges of the room, where the shadows were thickest, and it spread, slowly, like ink dropped in water. It touched everything. The walls, the floor, the air between us. It touched me. And somewhere beneath my rational mind, something ancient and animal woke up and said very clearly, "Do not move. Whatever is searching right now, do not let it find you." I fixed my eyes on the red digits of the clock above my desk and focused on the numbers changing. 1 minute, then 5, then 20. Somewhere between midnight and 2 in the morning, I fell asleep sitting up. I only realized it when Maya's voice pulled me back. "Divya, wake up. What's gone?" I asked, still half inside a dream I couldn't hold on to. She didn't answer right away. The silence stretched long enough that I thought maybe I'd imagined her voice entirely. "The shadow behind the walls," she finally whispered. Something about the way she said it hit me in a place that had nothing to do with logic. An old place, a deep place. The part of the human brain that hasn't changed in 100,000 years and exists for exactly one purpose: to tell you when something is wrong. By the time I found my voice, she was already gone. Not quiet, gone. There's a difference in a room when Maya left it. A shift you could feel even without seeing her. A few minutes later, there was a knock at my door. Actual knocking. I almost jumped out of my skin. I opened it, and she slipped past me without a word, crawled straight into bed, pulled the covers up to her chin, pressed her knees to the wall, and turned her back to the room. I got in behind her. Neither of us spoke. Eventually, sleep came. She didn't come back through the walls for a full week. When she did, she pulled me out of a dream about superfluid dynamics at 2 in the morning. Same as before, like no time had passed at all. "I think it's drawn to the language," she said quietly. "What is the shadow behind the walls? What is that thing, Maya?" "I don't know. Something big. Something old. Older than time, maybe." I almost made a joke, but something in her voice stopped me. "It doesn't talk," she continued, "but it listens, and I think it understands." I pulled the blanket tighter. "That's not comforting. It's not the only thing there, either." My heart rate spiked. "What do you mean?" "I mean there are other things. Most of them can't see me. I'm not quite where they are, same as I'm not quite where you are, but they can hear me, same as you can. Are you safe?" She was quiet for too long. "Sometimes," she said. "Sometimes." I sat up. "Maya, that's not. You have to stop this. We can destroy whatever you built. We can end this right now." "You don't understand," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word in a way that broke something in me. Because what came next, I wasn't ready for it. "I can't speak English anymore." The words landed wrong, like they were in the wrong order. "What do you mean you can't speak English?" "I mean I can't," she said, and I could hear her fighting back tears. "All week I've been trying, but all that comes out is sounds, scraping, gurgling, wrong sounds I don't even recognize. And out there I'm not invisible, Divya. Out there they can hear me, all of them, and they can hear you, and Claire, and Mum and Dad. None of us are safe when I'm out there. The only time I can talk right, the only time any of this sounds normal, is when I'm in here, in between, with you." My chest collapsed. I let this happen. I watched her disappear through walls, and I called it fascinating. I took notes. I let my curiosity override every instinct that should have told me to pull her back before it was too late. "Come back," I said. "Whatever we have to do, we'll figure it out." "But you can't stay there." "I know," she whispered. "I just didn't want to lose you. You still have me. Not like this. Not out there." I didn't have an answer that was good enough. We both knew it, but we also both knew there wasn't another option. I felt her presence fade. A few minutes later, there was a gentle knock at my door. She was standing in the hallway, shaking, silent sobs moving through her like tremors. I pulled her inside. We sat down on the floor, and we cried. We cried until we passed out from exhaustion. I woke to her, watching me, the same way she'd watched me sleep before. Except this time, the expression on her face was different, heavier, like she'd already accepted something I hadn't caught up to yet. "Maya?" I said softly. She nodded. "Can you?" She shook her head. "Nothing?" She glanced toward the hallway as footsteps passed by, then looked back at me. Something resolved in her eyes. She scooted close and raised her hand to signal me to lean in. I did. Her mouth was almost against my ear when she spoke, and I need you to understand, I have heard a lot of disturbing things in my life. I've read descriptions of infrasound frequencies that trigger dread responses in the human brain. I've studied theoretical constructs that, if true, would make the universe a fundamentally hostile place, but nothing I have ever encountered has come close to the sound that came out of my little sister's mouth in that moment. It wasn't language, not any language. It was something that crawled, something that scraped along the inside of the ear, like it was looking for a way deeper in. Each sound felt wrong on a level beneath conscious thought, like your cells recognized it as a threat before your brain could form the words to describe why. I wanted to pull away. Every instinct I had screamed at me to put distance between myself and that sound. But I understood every word, as clearly as if she'd whispered it to me in plain English on a quiet afternoon. I still don't know what's following her. I still don't know what the shadow behind the walls wants, or whether the things she described, the old things, the hungry things, I don't know if they found what they were listening for. What I do know is that Maya hasn't spoken a word of English in 22 years. And sometimes, late at night, when the room gets too quiet and the shadows pool at the edges of the walls, I still hear something listening. It was a late-night flight, New York to Los Angeles. Nothing special, just me, my carry-on, and a window seat. I boarded, noticed I had an entire row to myself, and honestly, that felt like a win. I stretched out, closed my eyes, and fell into one of those deep, heavy sleeps where you don't dream, you just disappear. And then I woke up. I don't know what pulled me out of it. Maybe the turbulence, maybe something else. But the moment my eyes opened, something felt wrong. The kind of wrong that doesn't make a sound. It just sits there, waiting for you to notice. I checked my phone, 4:03 a.m. I looked out the window, expecting darkness, maybe city lights in the distance, maybe the glow of the Nevada desert below. But what I saw instead made my stomach drop clean out of my body. Ocean, nothing but open, black ocean in every direction, as far as I could see. There is no ocean between New York and Los Angeles. I hit the call button, sat there running through every possible explanation in my head. A lake? No lake is that big. A wrong flight path? That doesn't make sense either. My mind kept trying to grab onto something rational and kept coming up empty. The flight attendant arrived. She flipped off the call light and she was smiling. Not a polite, professional smile. Something wider. Something wrong. And her cheeks, they were wet. Tears streaming down her face like she'd been crying for hours. "How can I help you, sir?" she asked. Her voice was completely steady, calm, like nothing in the world was unusual. "Where are we?" I said. "Why does it look like we're flying over an ocean?" She wiped her face, still smiling. "Sir, we'll be landing in about an hour," and she walked away. I looked back at my phone, 4:03 a.m. I sat there for what felt like 5, maybe 10 minutes. I pulled out my laptop, also 4:03. I opened a stopwatch app, started it running, and watched the seconds tick upward while the clock on my screen never moved. Not once. I leaned forward and tapped the shoulder of the woman in the row ahead of me. She turned around, annoyed. I asked how long until we landed. She said the flight attendant told her about an hour. I told her that flight attendant came by almost 2 hours ago, that we should have landed already. She looked at me like I had said something in a language she didn't speak. That's when I felt a hand on my shoulder. A male flight attendant this time, also smiling, also crying, tears hitting my shoulder as he leaned down. "Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down, or I'll have to contact the captain." I said that wouldn't be necessary. He stepped away, and I sat there, alone, trying not to look as terrified as I felt. Hours passed. The flight attendants kept coming by with meals. They kept smiling. They kept crying. My stopwatch kept climbing. 10 hours, 20, 30. I explored the back of the plane, tried talking to other passengers. Every single one of them told me we'd be landing in about an hour. I tried getting into first class, made it past the curtain before 2 attendants grabbed my arms. Their grip was like iron, like they weren't human at all. "Sir, the seatbelt sign is on," one said. "Please return to your seat. We'll be landing in about an hour." I had just about given up when a woman in a business suit walked down the aisle. She didn't look at me, didn't slow down, but as she passed my row, she dropped a folded piece of paper onto my tray table. I waited until she disappeared into the restroom. Then I opened it. 3 words. "Are you stuck too?" I grabbed a pen, wrote back, "Yes, it's been 30 hours, folded it up, left it on the edge of the tray." She picked it up without breaking stride on her way back. 20 minutes later, she came and sat beside me. She stayed low, kept her voice down, said her name was Lauren, said she'd been on this plane for over a day and a half, thinking she was completely alone. I told her what I thought was happening, that maybe we were dead. She shook her head. If this was some cosmic waiting room, why would there be 2 of us who can see it? She handed me her phone. She'd pulled up the Wikipedia article on Flight MH370, the Malaysian Airlines plane that vanished in 2014. I read through it. Dozens of theories, none of them satisfying. "Could have happened before," she said quietly. We figured out one thing we had in common. We were both deep asleep at 4:03 a.m. Not just dozing, actually gone. And then the cabin lights cut out. Red emergency lights flicked on across the floor of the aisle, bathing everything in this low, blood-colored glow. The intercom crackled. "Passengers, please return to your seats. We may experience some turbulence. We'll be landing in about an hour." Lauren looked at me. "Should I go back?" "Maybe stay," I said. "If they already know you're here, going back won't help." The intercom crackled again. "Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has arrived. Each passenger will be given an opportunity to speak with him personally. Please remain in your seats until called. A flight attendant will be happy to assist you." Sounds of passengers moving filtered through from further up the plane, through the curtain to first class. We could see shadows shifting. And then the smell hit us. Sulfur. Heavy, thick, putrid sulfur. Like the worst thing you have ever smelled in your life, filling the cabin in seconds. The woman in the row ahead of us didn't react, just kept watching her movie like nothing had changed. I told Lauren not to cough. We lasted maybe 10 seconds before we both gave in. The curtain opened. 4 flight attendants came through, moving slowly, smiling wide, and this time the tears on their faces weren't clear. In that red light, they looked dark, thick, but I wasn't looking at them. I was looking past them, at the shape standing near the cockpit door. A black silhouette, at least 8 feet tall, completely still, except for one arm, one long finger pointing directly at us. We ran for the bathrooms at the back of the plane. I hit the door, locked it, pressed my feet against the base to keep it from being forced open. They banged on the door, pulled at the handle. One of them spoke right through the gap in that perfectly calm customer service voice. "I'm sorry, sir. You'll both need to speak with the captain." And then Lauren screamed my name. I heard a snap, metal giving way. Her screaming moved up toward the front of the plane, and then it stopped. I stayed in that bathroom for hours, hands shaking, listening to nothing. I won't pretend I did something brave. I didn't. I just waited. Eventually I came out. Cabin lights were back on. No smell. Flight attendant offered me a meal, and I almost cried eating it. I made my way up to first class, found Lauren sitting alone by the window, earphones in, looking completely fine. I shook her arm. She pulled out her headphones and looked at me like I was a stranger. "How long have you been on this flight?" I asked. She checked her watch. "It's 4:03 a.m., so a few hours at least." She smiled gently. "Don't worry, we'll be landing in about an hour." Two flight attendants appeared behind me, tears on their cheeks, fresh blood streaked across the front of their uniforms. "Sir, this area is for first class only." I was taken back to my seat, and I stayed there. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into something I can't put a number on. No Wi-Fi after a while. Just the same movies on repeat, same meals, same smiling, crying faces every few hours. I started carving notches into the seat back just to feel like time was passing. Eventually, I broke. I walked to the emergency exit at the back of the plane. I grabbed the handle, told myself that nothing about this situation was normal, so maybe the door would open. It did. No rushing air, no pressure change, just a black opening and darkness below. I jumped. The wind hit me like something alive. The ocean rushed up, and for just a second, I didn't want to die. I wanted to live. I wanted to be anywhere but here. The water came up fast, black and enormous, and then I hit something, my knuckle, on the seat in front of me. I was back, in my seat, in the dark. My phone screen lit up, 4:04 a.m. The flight attendant who rushed over wasn't smiling. She wasn't crying. She looked worried, genuinely worried, like a real person. "Sir, are you okay?" I looked at my phone again. 4:05 a.m. I looked out the window. City lights, actual city lights, spread across the ground below like scattered embers. We landed an hour later. I don't know what happened up there. I don't know what that thing was at the front of the plane. I don't know where Lauren went, or what it did to her, or whether any of it was real in the way that word is supposed to mean. What I know is this: I'm sitting in a cafe right now. My coffee is getting cold. My hands haven't stopped shaking since I got off the plane. And I am never flying again. My father named me Layla because when I was born, my grandfather told him to treat me like a stray, like something picked up off the street and tolerated, but never loved. To my father, that word, Layla, was a leash around my throat. He used it to remind me of what I was, lesser, beneath, something to be corrected, not cherished. But here's the thing about names. The person giving them doesn't always understand what they're handing over. Because Layla was the name of a dog, a real dog, a stray from the streets of Moscow. On a cold November morning in 1957, the Soviet Union strapped her into a metal capsule called Sputnik 2 and launched her into space. She became the very first living creature to orbit the Earth. The Soviets knew how to get her up there. They just never figured out how to bring her home. Within hours of launch, the cabin overheated, and Layla died alone, spinning through the dark, millions of miles from anything she'd ever known. She died the same way she'd lived, forgotten, discarded, nothing but a dog. My father meant that name as an insult, but I wore it like armor. I grew up in a house with no warmth and no mercy, a house at the edge of a forest, far from any town, far from anyone who might have helped. My father was a cold, bitter man with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, but it was my grandfather who was the real terror. His name was Paul, and Paul was not entirely human. I know how that sounds. I know. But listen, just listen, because some truths are too strange to explain quickly, and this one I need you to understand before we go any further. By the time I turned 9, Paul had lived in 6 different bodies, not his own, other people's bodies. He moved between them like a hand sliding into a glove. He had a body of his own, something ancient and wrong, covered in scarred, glittering skin that could shrink down or stretch out like something from a nightmare. But that body couldn't handle sunlight. It blistered, it burned, so he found other bodies, wore them until they fell apart, until the skin went slack and the color drained out and you could see him behind the eyes. Those eyes, flat, yellow, like old coins pressed into stolen sockets. I was 3 years old the first time I saw him inside my mother. I ran to her with my arms wide open, and then she turned around and I saw those eyes looking back at me through her face. I screamed until my throat gave out. My father looked up from his chair and said, with a contempt so sharp it left a mark, "Shut up, dog." That was my life. That was the language spoken in our house. But then something changed. It started small, the way these things always do. I had a little brother. His name was Eli. He wasn't born the way most children are born. He came into the world through circumstances I can barely bring myself to describe, and my father carried him outside within minutes of his first breath into the frozen dark and left him in the snow. I found him by the sound of his crying, still covered in birth blood, still warm. I carried him home and named him Eli. My father hit me for it. My grandfather watched with those flat yellow eyes and said, "Let the dog keep her pup." Said it like it meant nothing, like Eli was nothing, but Eli was everything. He never learned to speak in words, but he could say anything with his hands, his eyes, the curve of his mouth. He was curious and gentle and sweet in a way that had no business existing in that house. Over time, his strange yellow eyes softened into a clear, bright green. He followed me everywhere. He was my heart, and that mattered, because what happened next, I'm still not sure I can explain it. I started dreaming, deep, vivid dreams of the dog from Moscow, the one I was named after. We'd fly together through star formations too beautiful to describe, nebulae like colored smoke, planets hanging heavy and silent in the black, and that dear, striped dog running beside me through all of it, like she'd been waiting for me. Sometimes when I woke up, I could still feel the warmth of fur under my hand, but one morning, something followed me out of the dream. I woke to see a small shape in the corner of my room. A child, blistered, burned, eyes melted away, a blue dress soaked with oil, dripping onto the floor. She reached for me with ruined hands and whispered, "Don't cry." I didn't scream. I didn't run. I don't know why. Maybe I'd run out of fear by then. Maybe I recognized something in her. Abandoned things tend to recognize each other. I asked her who she was. She didn't answer. But later, my father told me. Her name was Alex. She was his little sister. On his 12th birthday, his grandfather, my grandfather Paul, boiled a pot of oil and called her over to him. She was wearing her finest dress that day. White shoes, a blue dress. My father held a pair of those white shoes in his hands as he told me this. He held them like something holy. When my heart broke, he said quietly, I broke with it, and it made me like him. That night I dreamed of her again, a child melting in oil. The next night, she came to my room while I was awake. She crossed the floor, and she crouched down in front of my father, and she pressed one blistered hand to his face, and she wept. She said, "You're just like him now." My father made a sound I'd never heard him make before, something broken, and she sank into the floor and was gone. He never asked to see her again, and I never dreamed of her again after that. But Eli was still there, and Eli was what mattered. I should have known, I should have seen it coming, because in my family, every good thing was eventually used against you. One morning in early spring, I bundled Eli into every piece of clothing I could find, took his hand, and we walked. We followed the path through the forest, toward the distant town neither of us had ever seen. We were barely a mile in when something came out of the trees. I caught a glimpse of scaled skin and enormous yellow eyes, and then Eli was screaming, and then he wasn't screaming anymore. I don't remember all of it. I think my mind stepped outside my body and went somewhere else. I remember the snow, the way red looked against white, and I remember collapsing, holding what was left. My father found us near nightfall. He pressed bread and a piece of food into my hands. He didn't speak. He just left. I lay down next to Eli in the cold. I pulled him against me, and my mind finally let go. It drifted up, past the trees, past the cloud line, up and up and up, until the earth was spinning below me, blue and curved and heartbreakingly small. And there she was, rocketing through the dark in her little metal shell, Layla. I reached out and grabbed hold of the capsule. I could feel her fear vibrating through the metal, her confusion, her pain. "It's okay," I said. "I'm here. When you land, I'll help you out and we'll play together." Her fear quieted, and so did mine. I woke up in the snow, cold and stiff, and in more pain than I knew what to do with, and something bumped my hand, a wet nose, a striped face, a curly tail. Stars glimmered through her fur like pinpricks of light. Layla. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know what it means, but she was there, solid and warm and very, very real. That's when my grandfather came through the trees. He saw her and he laughed, called her a mutt, said I was wasting my talent on something so small and worthless. And she attacked him. She wasn't big. She wasn't built to fight something like Paul, but she tore into him the way a lit match tears into paper. She bit and she held and she didn't let go, even when she was bleeding from a dozen wounds, even when she should have stopped. She brought him to his knees. What happened next? I've spent years trying to forget. My grandfather made himself small and slid down into Eli. Eli's body sat up and smiled with those yellow eyes. Layla attacked again, bit and held and wouldn't stop. Snow crunched behind me. My father stood at the edge of the trees with a gun in his hands, and on his face, contempt, same as always. He walked past me. He raised the gun. I screamed at him not to hurt her. He didn't. He aimed at Eli. He fired until my grandfather slithered out of what was left, and then he pressed the barrel against Paul's good eye. The sun came up over the mountain. Paul burned slowly. It took a long time. Layla held on until the very end. Then she came to me and collapsed in my lap. I stroked her fur and told her she was good, that she was the best dog in the world. I knew what I'd done. I'd called her down from the stars and used her, the same way everyone in my family used everything they touched. "I'm sorry," I told her. "I'm so sorry." Her body shrank and sank into the earth. All that was left were tiny, warm, glowing orbs scattered in the snow, stars fallen from her fur. I gathered them into my hands, slipped them into my pocket. I sat with Eli until the sun was fully up. Then I stood and I walked away. The power didn't go away overnight. For a while, things kept crawling out of my dreams, but I starved it. I refused to feed it with rage or grief. I let it grow quiet. Eventually it went silent, because I decided something. Dogs don't have powers like that. Dogs don't carry darkness around inside them, calling it a gift. Dogs are loyal and warm and present and uncomplicated, and that's all I ever wanted to be. My grandfather meant that name as a sentence, a life spent lesser, beneath, behind. But Layla was the first living creature to orbit the earth. She saw everything before the rest of us even looked up. And somehow, I think she knew that was enough.